Can an impeached president win re-election? We're about to find out why voters may be the ones to make a final decision on Donald Trump. The candidates come to California. With an earlier primary in 2020, this week's Democratic debate carries more weight. And it doesn't take effect until the new year, but already a major new employment law is having consequences, including hundreds of layoffs. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, Sarah Libby, Managing Editor of Voice of San Diego, Michael Smolens, columnist with the San Diego Union Tribune, and KPBS border and immigration reporter Max Rivlin-Nadler. Well, the adage about defense attorneys held forth in the House of Representatives as they impeached Donald J. Trump this week for abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. If you have the facts, pound the facts. If you have the law favors you, pound the law. If you have neither, pound the table. And Republicans have done a lot of table pounding and projecting Trump's favorite method of attack. In the historic impeachment hearing, Republicans really mounted no defense of Trump, instead accusing Democrats of abusing power, of a massive cover-up, an assault on the Constitution, election interference, of shattering precedents. They called for Adam Schiff's indictment and Nancy Pelosi's expulsion. That's right, indictment. And now the case against the president heads towards trial in the Senate, where the majority leader says he's working hand in glove with Trump and his attorneys. And Michael, it's a lot here to unpack. What struck you? This was almost a straight party line vote on impeachment this week.
Yes, sort of taking a step back, Wednesday, impeachment day, was a very historic day, yet a very predictable day. The following day, Thursday, was fascinating and totally unpredictable. Pelosi decided to hold on to the articles of impeachment, not send them to the Senate to negotiate terms, so we don't know. Suddenly, this whole very certain process has become a little bit uncertain at the time being. The real mind blower on Thursday, though, was Christianity Today coming out with a very strong editorial urging the removal of the president. The president has a lot of support among evangelicals, and let's face it, like any group, not everybody, it's not a monolith, but this really, I think, caught a lot of attention and surprised a lot of people.
Important magazine founded by Billy Graham.
Correct. And the editorial said that in no uncertain terms, what he did were impeachable offenses, and even more so, I think in their view, more importantly, they were highly immoral, and talked about his character a lot. And also reflected back that they made similar statements about President Clinton, and they felt they had to be consistent. So that was very interesting. But getting back to the actual impeachment day, yes, the day started out kind of interesting. It was almost routine for such a historic thing. We knew what was going to happen. But I think after the fact, and maybe it's that, everything blew up as big news does online and the big headlines, you realize, or at least I did, the momentousness of what just happened. It was only the third impeachment of a U.S. president, the second in our lifetime throughout the history of this country. Moreover, it was the first-term president. So we'll see for the first time, unless the Senate does something surprising, a president up for re-election after he's been impeached. Right,
and the facts in this case, as I said in the open, really not disputed. Trump withheld $391 million in military aid, dangled a White House meeting to Ukraine's new president, attempt to get him to announce an investigation into a political rival, and he blocked key witnesses from testifying and refused subpoenas for documents. And here's how outgoing Representative Susan Davis, Democrat of San Diego, put it on the floor.
Madam Speaker, make no mistake. We are not impeaching this president. He is impeaching himself. If you are the president and you obstruct justice, try to bribe a foreign leader, and threaten national security, you're going to get impeached. End of story.
And Michael, why do Trump and his congressional supporters keep insisting that Democrats and the American people should be okay with what's going on?
Well, the Republican Party has been hollowed out and has become the Trump Party, so they're marching in lockstep. I think the bigger question is why his sort of rank and file regular people keep supporting him. And, there's a bit of a cult of personality, but it's more than that. He still speaks, as he did in 2016, to the anger and frustration that is out there, not just among his supporters, towards Washington. And now he's got sort of what he thinks is Exhibit A, see how unfair and how rigged the system is. They believe that. And I think also that, domestic politics have often played a role in foreign policy. Never to this extent, but we've seen presidents throughout history, when they're kind of in trouble at home, make a foreign trip or somehow ramp up some foreign policy action. Not suggesting a wag the dog, and wars have been started in that regard. But this, I mean, to make clear, it goes beyond anything we've ever seen. I mean, asking foreign powers twice to intercede in an election to help them out. That's unprecedented. In
the Washington Post yesterday, they published a story quoting former Trump aides about his refusal to give up this crazy CrowdStrike conspiracy theory regarding Ukraine officials. Big part of the first article of impeachment here. They supposedly, Ukraine officials in cahoots with Democrats to hack their own servers, release the damaging emails, blame Russia, and keep it all quiet till after the 2016 election. Is Trump getting played by Putin, as Nancy Pelosi is suggesting?
Well, certainly some people seem to think so. There's been some reporting out that he actually came to the conclusion that Ukraine was involved from Putin, according to some unnamed aides. Now, I don't know if that's true, but you figure that the Post, has confidence in their sources. So,
and remember his comments in Helsinki.
That's happening. On top of that, we had Putin the other day giving a long defense of Trump and criticism of impeachment, and some people said, well, wow, he's using Republican talking points. I'm sort of wondering, were Republicans using his talking points that he's now repeating?
Exactly.
I mean, it's crazy what's going on.
Right. Now, as impeachment votes were being cast the other night, President Trump was holding a campaign rally in Battle Creek, Michigan. Here's some of his reaction to being impeached.
By the way, it doesn't really feel like we're being impeached. Do you? The country is doing better than ever before. We did nothing wrong. We did nothing wrong. And we have tremendous support in the Republican Party like we've never had before. Nobody's ever had this kind of support. The do-nothing Democrats, and they are do-nothing. All they want to do is focus on this. What they could be doing are declaring their deep hatred and disdain for the American voter. This lawless partisan impeachment is a political suicide march for the Democrat Party.
All right, actually, the Democratic House has passed some 400 bills: climate change, gun violence, lowering drug costs, voting rights, new NAFTA agreement, major spending bill, etc. This retrenchment over impeachment and the perilous check and balance system that we've been talking about here, what's this say about the future of democracy in this country?
Well, in sort of a bizarre way, impeachment has sort of been good for action being done, because both sides had it in their interest to show they were getting the job done while the impeachment was happening. So we saw this flurry of activity, and you ticked off a whole bunch of things. That Trump had some wins with the USMCA, the new NAFTA, as well as what appears to be an emerging agreement with China. So we'll see. For democracy, I think democracy is going to survive. I mean, we're being very challenged. We'll have to see what happens in the coming year and election. We've gone through some tough times. People, I think, get very short-sighted about, is this the most divided the country's been? And we had a civil war, and we had the Vietnam War, and argue certainly the latter even was greater difficulty than we're having now. And
Max, something you've covered a lot, of course, is immigration. That is a key divisive issue here.
Yeah, it's a huge issue, but one that has kind of taken a back seat to these impeachment hearings, right? As the Republicans get bogged down in defending Trump, the rhetoric moves away from the wall, things that Trump would like to kind of focus on heading into 2020. It'll be interesting to see if that kind of gaze returns back towards, what he would refer to as like the scourge of immigration, things like that, where we've really moved away from it. And in fact, he's been nothing but complimentary to the Mexican president, especially as they ratify this trade deal.
And I wanted to talk about, you alluded to it earlier, Michael, on this whole issue of witnesses here. It should be noted President Bill Clinton, when he was impeached December 1998, some of us were around then, he had apologized for lying about an affair. He didn't interfere with House managers. They planned to produce new witnesses and testimony. Trial took about 5 weeks. Let's talk about this trial in the Senate. McConnell wants no witnesses. Chuck Schumer, the Democrat minority leader, wants at least 4 men with direct knowledge of the Ukraine scandal. Is this going to be negotiated? We're going to see a real trial or what?
We'll see. Like I said, Pelosi did throw a curveball into things. We thought things were just going to move along to the kind of trial, quote unquote, that you're talking about. My guess is that I think they've got to move forward. She can't hold on to them forever. I think that it is McConnell's House, and they'll get their way.
But a political ramification to all of it, right?
Well, yeah, but there's risk on both sides. He wants it over quickly to get it moved on. Pelosi wanted an expedited process or things to move fast. Now I think she's, trying to raise Trump's anxiety over the holidays, frankly. But the longer this drags out, the more it might hurt some of the swing district incumbents that I think they would like to move on from impeachment to health care and the other things
and
that
get into
people
the election,
more care about than have to talk about this.
Well, the end of the first week in January, we'll see how that all plays out. Well, we're going to move on to a related topic now. 7 Democrats, roughly half of those still seeking to replace Donald Trump next year, squared off in Los Angeles for another debate Thursday night. It was notably a white group: former Vice President Joe Biden, Senators Bernie Sanders of Vermont, Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg, California billionaire Tom Steyer, and tech entrepreneur Andrew Yang. He's up in New York. And Max, a debate here in California, first of all, it kind of highlights that we've got the early primary this year, and California's kind of in the spotlight where, it didn't, wasn't that way when we were back in the June primary days.
Yeah, it's really forefronted California with, it has a massive amount of delegates. It has put it on the map in terms of candidates coming to California. You've seen Sanders, this is his 3rd trip this year to San Diego, or since he announced his candidacy in February. On top of that, you've seen large rallies in Los Angeles. Warren has been here quite a few times. Buttigieg did a rally last month in San Diego. So usually California was this afterthought, or, basically if California was in play, then something had seriously gotten drawn out in the Democratic nomination. Even last time around, the Associated Press called the election for the primary for Clinton on the day before the California primary. And that kind of showed voters who, had been engaged in California the need to move up the primary to get their voices heard. Because
as we'll talk about a lot on this show, there's other issues on that primary, and of course that's the big draw. Right. Now, Bernie Sanders in San Ysidro today, Friday. What's the focus of the rally here?
He's calling it his immigration rally. He has a fairly, in line with Bernie, a progressive agenda that he's trying to push here. This includes reinstating DACA and expanding it. It includes decriminalizing border crossing, which is actually held by quite a few members of the Democratic candidates. He's calling for, this is a step beyond all the other candidates, a temporary moratorium on deportations until he could look at the entire system while in office. So, as kind of the vanguard of this policy here, he's the first one holding a rally along the California border here to actually highlight these issues. Well,
I want to get a soundbite in from last night's debate, Friday night, or Thursday night, I should say, for our listening folks here. The child separation issue, Max, you've covered that quite a bit, came up. Here's South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg, here, what he had to say.
Are you committing, as president, to financial compensation for those thousands of children?
Yes, and they should have a fast track to citizenship, because what the United States did under this president to them was wrong, and we have a moral obligation to make right what was broken.
Now, Max, we touched on this a little bit earlier. How's this all going to play out as the campaign heats up in the election year coming up?
So in terms of, basic immigration policies, you've seen this leftward shift as you've seen the entire political dynamic between, the Democratic candidates. Whether immigration becomes kind of a vital topic will remain to be seen. One thing that's propelled Bernie Sanders, at least in California, he was at the top of the KQED NPR poll this week. Just a few points ahead of Warren and Biden, so really showing that California is unsettled. That being said, he has really strong Latino support. He's pulling in the most voters of any candidate. So as much as immigration is kind of a top-line concern for Latinos in California, he'll continue to ride that support. That's why he's holding the immigration rally in San Diego today, and then tomorrow he's going to Los Angeles with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez who is, his most prominent surrogate at this point. So it should be interesting to watch whether that momentum for Bernie will be able to continue, but California is definitely very fluid at the moment and should be the focus of a lot of attention because I don't think the primary will be settled by the time of Super Tuesday.
And Michael, you covered Elizabeth Warren's rally at the waterfront this fall. Pete Buttigieg was here for a fundraiser / rally at the House of Blues. What's the impact of these candidates coming to San Diego, having to compete in California, since we're no longer, as I say, this late afterthought, and it's a tough state to run a big campaign in?
It is, and Max hit on a lot of the kinds of things they're doing. They had always come to raise money, and they would hold sort of an obligatory public event here and there and so forth. But you're seeing campaign structure and money being spent. I mean, it's an expensive place. And that will be interesting because, a lower finance candidate can do a lot of retail in Iowa and New Hampshire. But now with Texas and California and all these other states coming right on the heels of that, they can't just wait for that moment. So you're seeing just a lot more, like I said, campaign infrastructure and attention, as we've talked about.
And Sarah, much has been written since the 2018 midterms about the importance of women voters in many places. How big a factor are women going to play in the primaries, and then as we get on to the general election later?
I think women will always be a hugely important constituency, but it's also important to remember that women aren't universally Democratic voters. White women especially were a really critical voting bloc for President Trump.
But as we saw in the midterms, a lot of that shifted in the suburbs among women, and in certain places we had the special election recently in Kentucky, saw that again in urban suburbs, though a lot of that state is rural.
Yeah, I think women are motivated not just by issues that obviously directly impact them, like abortion, but I think the issues like child separation are something that play especially heavily with women, and so that will be at the forefront of women voters' minds.
And a woman candidate this year didn't work out for the Democrats in 2016, obviously, but we're still looking for that first woman president.
There's still a few in the mix.
There are. I thought Amy Klobuchar, I must say, and watching the debate last night, she was a very strong candidate.
The woman got 3 million more votes in 2016, as we know, but
no
that's
question.
We haven't changed the system.
That doesn't count in a way.
No, it doesn't count when it gets down to this quirk of the Electoral College. Michael, it's almost a given the Democrat will win California next November. Wasn't always the case, right? What's the voter registration breakdown these days?
Well, this used to be Reagan country, really not that long ago.
And Orange County was notorious as being the Republican heartland.
It's about low 40% Democrat. It's risen over time. The Republicans are down in the 26, 27%. Actually, they've been surpassed. I think they're a little lower, surpassed by the people that have no party preference. It's very interesting, though, over the last 10 years, the Democratic registration has only risen by about a point. The Republicans have dropped about 10 points. The NPPs, as they're now called, that's gained 10 or so points. Not all from the Republican Party, but it's really been a surge. Interestingly, San Diego had been a hotbed of the Reform Party, of the Independent Party kind of movement, or independent voter movement. We do have the Independent Voter Project here that former legislator Steve Peace has had a hand in creating. So that's sort of the trend. But as we know, these people still hold on to their political philosophies in a lot of cases. They are Republican and Democratic leading. They just don't want to be affiliated.
See who it is. Well, we'll see how that plays out. Then we should note those independents can vote in the Democratic primary this time around. Well, we're going to move on. We turn now to the specter of unintended consequences. California AB 5. It's a law designed to protect gig workers, among them truckers and strippers and freelance journalists. I'm all in the same breath there. It was championed by San Diego Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez. More about her in a moment, but the law was intended to prevent companies from wrongly classifying workers as independent contractors rather than employees in order to avoid worker protections such as health insurance benefits, paid sick days. And Sarah, explain the news this week. Apparently AB 5 is going to cause a couple of hundred layoffs among some freelance journalists, right?
Yeah, I would say it's actually not an unintended consequence, but an intended one of this law, which was to ensure that companies are following what is already established labor law, and also to make sure that people have these protections in place, that they're not being exploited. So the website's network SB Nation announced that it was cutting ties with a lot of its California-based freelancers and would instead be hiring part-time and full-time workers, which is, precisely what the law set out to do.
And the law, as we said, there was controversial because it meant to stop employers from exploiting gig workers, as you say. But we should note in this case here, they do fail to mention the federal class action suits that accuse the company of systemically shortchanging writers and editors and classifying them as contractors.
Yeah, so that website in particular has been criticized for years for exploiting workers and underpaying them. And so it's kind of interesting now in the wake of the last week to see people rising up to defend them from having these arrangements.
And we should point out that Vox, this overall company of this website you're talking about, has denied those assertions. Well, how's the public distinguish, the crying poor mouth by companies versus serious impacts on a business model?
I think the public and even some lawmakers, to be frank, are still incredibly confused about what the law actually does. So the law actually just codified a Supreme Court ruling, and then it added a bunch of carve-outs for people, like you said, including doctors and freelance workers. Now, obviously, the freelance journalists don't like the carve-out that the law kind of spelled out. They also filed suit this week. That was, there's been a lot of news this week about the law.
Right.
And so they're contending that this 35 article cap is, unfairly singling them out, and they think the law should be overturned for that reason.
And along those lines, some of the big ride-sharing companies are vowing to fight AB 5, get it overturned at the ballot box next year. It's tough to do, right?
It's very tough to do, but it is being attacked on all kinds of fronts. So you have these challenges in court. Republican lawmakers have also floated a constitutional amendment that, of course, has a very high bar to pass. And then you'll see it try to be overturned at the ballot box as well, where these gig economy companies, DoorDash and Uber, are pumping tens of millions of dollars into that effort.
All right, let's circle back to Lorena Gonzalez here. And we got a soundbite from her about what she says, her view of AB 5's intent. And then I want to hear your take on what she's been saying about it.
If you're a gig worker, if you're a truck driver, if you're a janitor, and you're working for the company, you're doing the basic work for that company, you are their employee, and you actually deserve everything that any of us in any other job get. The right to minimum wage, the right to overtime, the right to paid sick days, paid family leave, unemployment insurance, workers' compensation, the right to have laws that protect us from harassment and discrimination, and of course, the right to organize.
So that's kind of been her take all along, right?
Yeah, so she has argued that a lot of the anger about this law is misplaced and that it's actually the employers who are responsible for a lot of this anger. So there's nothing in the law that says you can't set your own hours, that says you can't work from home. So a lot of these luxuries that people like freelancers really enjoy, there's nothing in the law that says you can't do that. It's employers who could choose to say you have to work a set number of hours.
We can work it out, the Beatles said. Max?
Yeah, as somebody who very recently was a freelance journalist in California, I could tell you, the status quo before the bill was this state Supreme Court decision. The legislators had to act on this. I was being denied work by, the employer saying, well, we don't want to get sued. And so, people viewing this as kind of a be-all, end-all as opposed to, hey, this was a bill to address a ruling and we could kind of work through this together. I think the anger that's being flared up, frankly, I'm a little suspicious as who's exactly behind this, because we know there's a lot of money coming in against AB 5 from people like DoorDash, Lyft, and Uber, like, millions and millions of dollars.
Well, Gonzalez herself, you and fellow journalists at Voice of San Diego, you made her one of your candidates for Voice of the Year. First, tell us what that means and give us, for the record, who won that.
Yeah, so we put this package out every year that kind of recognizes the people who have started the biggest conversations. So it's not really an honor or a validation of their positions so much as it is just reflecting who got us talking. And as you can see from the conversations, absolutely, from the conversation we just had, Lorena Gonzalez is absolutely top of mind. Our overall Voice of the Year went to Hassan Hakrata, who's the director of Sandag. He might not be a household name.
We've talked about him at the Roundtable. That makes him a household name.
Absolutely, yeah. But all of these conversations that we've been having locally about transit, about highways, about bike lanes, about how we get to the airport, about how we're going to address climate change, all of those have been started in a way by him and what he set out to do with that agency.
And Lorena Gonzalez made some enemies. She's in the crosshairs, done a big year for her in Sacramento. Some aspirations for her down the road?
Oh, absolutely. She's already stated that she's running for Secretary of State in 2022 when that position's open. But, you know, she's been a big endorser of Elizabeth Warren. So, you know, I guess there's a universe in which President Warren could tap her for a cabinet position. But she's certainly got, you know, aspirations for higher office.
That's right. I think she introduced her, did she not, at that Warren rally that you covered?
Yes, and I think that day was the day they formally announced her endorsement, so to get that big impact.
We've got a few seconds left here, but I wanted to ask, are we going to see some more of those kinds of endorsements from notable Californians as we get closer to the primary? They're going to pick their horses?
The governor, Gavin Newsom, was at the debate last night, and of course he had backed, I believe, Kamala Harris, correct?
Right. Everyone did.
Who's out.
Yeah, and so his endorsement in California is going to be a big deal, and he's playing it pretty close to the vest. He's got a lot of friends on the stage, I think he said, so that'll be surely one to watch.
You got the mayor of LA, got the attorney general.
And he's pro-wine seller, of course. He made that very clear.
Right, yeah.
So, you know, maybe that's tipping his hat, but as a former, you know, wine entrepreneur himself, he didn't.
Well,
too kindly.
fortunately, we have all sorts of time to chew on this as we get into 2020. Well, that does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. And I'd like to thank my guests, Sarah Libby of Voice of San Diego, Michael Smullins of the San Diego Union Tribune, and Max Rivlin-Nadler of KPBS News. And I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable, and please tune in next week for a special year-end top stories of 2019. And have a very safe and very merry holiday.